And I see it. Cool. It's all yours.
Nice. All right, so hi, I'm Arimia, and today I'm going to give you not one, but two postmortems. The first will be my visual novel that took me 4 years to complete, and the second will be one that took me just 4 months. So, a little bit about me. I first started making visual novels in 2015, so about 5-6 years ago. My first commercial visual novel was released in 2018, and last year I was able to publish A Pinch of Magic, Asterism, and Crimson Waves on the Emerald Sea, which are 3 very different visual novels. My game studio is Crystal Gameworks, and I also do the marketing for Studio Elan. So a little bit about the 2 VNs I'm going to talk about today. First one is Asterism. So here's a little brief overview of it real quick. Asterism's entire playthrough time is about 6 to 10 hours. There's a lot of choices in it, but they're small choices. They only affect the dialogue and a few scenes because there's only one ending to Asterism. There's several scenes and stuff, like there's an optional male love interest that you can date, but there is only one real ending. Asterism's development started on February 20th, 2017, and it released on Steam and itch.io on July 20th of last year. The second one I'm going to talk about is called Crimson Waves on the Emerald Sea. It's about an hour to 3 hours to play through it entirely. It has no choices, so it's a kinetic novel, as it only has one ending. However, it does have a swapping perspective to the story, where each chapter swaps perspective between the 2 main characters that you can see here, Nemo and Cecil. The development for this was started on August 27th, and just about 4 months later, it was released on Steam and itch.io. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Asterism. Asterism is a modern fantasy action visual novel about a group of high schoolers who have to save the Zodiac with these constellations, with these weapons that are like made from constellations, and they have to fight shadow monsters, and it's very chooty. As you can probably tell, I really like, I'm a bit of a shonen junkie, and that was something that really inspired me to make the story. I want to combine shonen story tropes with turn-based RPG combat in a modern fantasy setting. So here's some examples of like how the RPG combat was supposed to work. I say supposed to because the released version of Asterism does not have any of this exploration, any of this battle mechanics. So why is that? Well, Asterism was supposed to be a hybrid visual novel with turn-based combat and, visual novel for storytelling. However, while Asterism was mostly a solo project, there were no hard deadlines for the parts that were commissioned. So I did most of the artwork, I did all the writing, and most of the programming, but the RPG stuff was done by other people. Specifically, the battle mechanics were done and, well, they were being worked on, except there was no hard deadlines for any of it. So a deadline would come and it would not be met. The deadline, we'd set a new deadline, we'd push the flag back a little bit, we'd reach it, wouldn't be met again, and it's kept on doing that for almost 2 years, which is a lot. So because of these deadlines not being met and being pushed back, it really, really hurts development. But On the other side, on my part, I refused to cut it out for the longest. I held on. I was like, no, it'll get finished eventually. It'll be worth it. Um, and the problem was, once I did finally get most of the mechanics for the battle system, I had to spend so much time actually making it work that I didn't have time to polish it. So eventually I had to delete it. And that is why the current version of Asterism is an action visual novel with the cutscenes that we'll see a little bit later, where it's Fate Stay Night-esque cutscenes. Another reason was that the full amount of assets and the work involved was not fully outlined. Well, it wasn't really outlined at all for the first 2 years of development. That's a lot. But to give you like a better example of like how long it took for Asterism to be finished, I had a bachelor's degree by the time this game was done, and I was like fresh out of high school almost, but when I started it. Another example is that I mentioned that my first commercial visual novel was released in 2018. That visual novel was started and finished during Asterism's development. So it was a long time. Now, the reason I did not really outline a lot of the assets and stuff is because it was mostly a solo project. So I did not really think, especially because I was such a new dev, that I had to outline it as rigorously as I would a project that I'm working on with others. The scope I never really set in stone because of this, because it was a solo project. I just vaguely understood it. And as the years went on, it was like, oh, I've been working on this so long. Of course I know what the scope is. I didn't. I didn't. Don't trust yourself. Please don't do it. And the outlines I did have, I didn't really follow them. Asterism went through 6 different script rewrites. These were not entire script rewrites, but rather key parts to the story were changed and characters were added or removed. And I just didn't do enough planning. To show you one more example of how the scope ballooned, here are most of the sprites of characters in Asterism. This is not all of them. I had to draw all of these, and some of them I redrew because my art style changed so much over the course of development. That is not all of them, Cam. Can you believe that? There's more that I did not put on this slide. If I were to remake Asterism today, which I definitely will not, I would redo the outline from scratch, scrap some characters, and decide on a stronger focus. I say this because, again, like the script went through so many changes that while it had a general focus for what I wanted it to be for all of them, it slightly changed with each. Like the pinpoint of the focus changed with each. And it just became rather muddled by the end of it. I would also use a pre-existing turn-based RPG framework with no exploration. Each on their own works fine, but trying to combine the two and then also make sure that it is polished enough up to RPG standards it's a lot. It's a lot. But yeah. The second visual novel I'll be talking about is Crimson Waves on the Emerald Sea. It is a mystery character drama set in Victorian times about a rich kid who runs away from home to try and find his best friend who has also run away from home. And he stumbles upon a vagabond who is looking for a cure to vampirism. And in order to find these things, they both have to solve a decade-old vampire attack. like with Asterism, I wanted to write a story that felt like something you could find in like a Shonen Jump manga. But with Crimson Waves, which I started after Asterism was released, I really just wanted to make a short solo project, something that could be done in a timely manner. So that was one of my main goals going in. Nothing actually really went wrong with the development of Crimson Waves. It was a very smooth 4 months, development wise. And the reason for that is because I had a clean scope from the beginning. I had a clean vision. It was very clear what I wanted from the project, how long I wanted it to be, and what the focus of the project was. It also went a lot smoother because I did most everything myself. And for the things that I didn't do, I used pre-made assets for the rest. So for example, the UI was done by my friend Felissa. Meanwhile, the music is all stock music, sound effects stock. The artwork, the writing, programming, that was all me. My scope from the very beginning for this was I wanted 4 main characters, and I wanted to swap perspective between the adult character that you see here, Nemo, and the child character, Cecil. I wanted to be under 40,000 words, wanted to be short. I wanted to have a limited amount of choices, which would, again, help with limiting the scope because there's not as many routes and diverging paths to go down. And I also wanted to have photo backgrounds. That might sound like a bit of a weird thing to include in the scope, but it was a very important part of it for me. And I'll explain that in just a little bit. The scope for at release, so what it is right now, is it has 4 main characters and it swaps perspective between 2 of them, like I said earlier. It's around 26,000 words, I believe. Pretty short. It has no choices. I decided to make it fully kinetic, and it has the photo backgrounds. So as you see, the scope didn't change much at all. The scope actually went down in size. Now, to talk a little bit about the photo backgrounds choice. For Asterism, that you can see here on the right, I had a very lengthy process because I decided I want all of the backgrounds to be hand-drawn, and I want to do most of them. That was not a good decision because Asterism has a lot of locations because the original outline for it was, this is a exploratory RPG, so there's got to be a lot of dungeons and places to visit. That's not a good idea. Please don't do that. Please, not on a solo project. So I'd start with a sketch, I'd outline it, do the flat colors, and then I'd finally finish it 4+ hours later. And you do that about 30-something times because Asterism had at least like 25 backgrounds. That's a lot. Meanwhile, for Crimson Waves, here on the left, I would go to Unsplash or other free-to-use photo websites. I'd find a picture that I liked, then I'd run it through 2 different filters, and finally I'd have my background. I would edit, sometimes I'd have to edit the backgrounds to get rid of anything that was obviously modern that the filters wouldn't get rid of. But for the most part, it was just running them through a couple filters, and about 20 minutes later, I'd have a background. And because I was using these photo backgrounds, I was not limited to the amount of areas in my writing, which was another reason that I wanted to use those kinds of backgrounds. And guess what? Filtered photos are perfectly fine to use for backgrounds. It's okay. You can use them. They're not cheap and lazy if you make them work. Because my original scope for Crimson Waves was to include these photo backgrounds, I actually changed the art style of shading because I did all of the artwork. I decided to try a different style to make them look watercolor so that they would fit in with the more painterly style of the backgrounds. And one additional note that I forgot here. As you can see, this type of background took about 4+ hours to do, while this one took about 20-ish minutes. Because I was doing Crimson Waves solo, that 20-ish minutes, it was done. But meanwhile, I knew I did not want to draw all of the backgrounds myself for Crimson Waves. So if I had to commission someone else, then this 4+ hours would have been their 4 hours, but I would also have to add in the time to find the person, to talk to them, give them the details, then accepting the sketch, the line art, accepting all of those processes, then them finally sending it over. And that's a lot longer than just 4 hours. And because I wanted this to be a very short, quick project, this really was the better choice for me, the backgrounds. So you've heard me ramble for quite a bit, but what are some lessons that you can take from this to apply to your own projects? Well, first one is to try to limit how much a project hinges on things that you want to have versus things that it needs to have. Like I said earlier, you really need to just focus in on what the project is about. What is necessary for me to tell the story that I want to tell? One quick example that really goes for all of my points that I'm about to say, but for Crimson Waves, I wanted the main girl, Lucy, to have multiple outfits because she's supposed to be this pretty and pristine, adorable little girl. So I wanted to dress her up, but that wasn't really feasible with the time constraints, and also in the story itself, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So I cut that out. Another example would be if, say, for instance, you are working on a team project and someone on your team is not responding or they are making slower progress than usual, you have to sit down with them and talk about it. I know it's painful to do sometimes, but it is very, very important because sometimes it can be the end of the project if you don't. So make sure that the need to haves are the important ones, not just what you want in the project. My next point, redoing story outlines is fine, but you have to have a clear goal for the story. Like I've said before, you have to have the focus. If you don't have the focus for why you are making this project and what you want the reader to come out of it with, then all of your outlines and planning really aren't going to be that effective because you'll be remaking them until you have that goal, until you have that focus. And my next one, as I see people can already see, don't be afraid to take the scope knife to your beloved project. I had to do the ultimate scope knife stabbing to Asterism by taking out the RPG mechanics, and it hurt me. It hurt me so much, but the only reason Asterism is released right now is because I did that. So, yeah, don't be afraid to take the scope knife to a project because otherwise it'll be in your back. It is not fun, but it is absolutely necessary sometimes. Even though Crimson Waves was such a short project, I did take the scope knife to it. I did cut out some things. I added some things to the scope as well, but I did have to cut out some things. That is just a necessary and normal part of game development. So I think that about wraps it up for this brief double postmortem. Questions, I'm open to them. Brief aside, join us in Dev Talk. There's the link. My Twitter is Arimia Dev, And my studio Twitter is Crystal Gamework. No S because Twitter limits. And my blog is arimiadev.com. That's where I talk about a lot of marketing stuff. And yeah, that's about it.
All right. So anyone have questions? Okay, so what kind of writing length do you aim for on a smaller project? Word count or as well as scene by scene in outlining?
I define a small project for myself to be around like 40,000 words, like underneath that. But I am also the person who will overshoot my word counts ideas. So like for Crimson Waves, I was aiming for 40,000, and then it was just around like 25,000 when I actually wrote it. So yeah, for small projects, usually under 40,000 for myself.
All right, and then there is a, how do you know when you are planning too much for yourself?
Probably when you have most of the basics planned, like when you have the outline done, when you have the mechanics done, the characters done. When you have all of those done and you're getting into like the really nitty gritty stuff, but there's really no reason to, I guess. Like, I don't really call myself an over planner, but I would say when you're spending more time planning than actually doing the writing and the artwork and such after you've already done the basics of outline and scope.
Cool. Do you have any opinion on splitting a large project into episodic releases to reduce the distance to a tangible finish line?
My personal opinion is that would terrify me, just because episodic releases are so hard to keep up with. Because you got to keep up the marketing efforts for them. You got to keep up your own like determination to finish it once you've started it. Because once you release episode 1 or 2, you're not done. You got to keep that up. So my opinion is it would terrify me. Doable, but you would have to have a very strong work ethic.
Cool. Someone asked, how did the reception commercial outcomes compare between your two projects?
So this was one point that I was thinking of adding, but I forgot to. Asterism was a commercial release, but because it took so long to develop, and because it's changed minor focus so much during development, I knew it would not be a commercial success. I was just releasing it to be done with it and to, just have it out there. So it did not do too well. Because, at one point it was, this is an action RPG visual novel hybrid. And then at one point it was, it's a like boys love story. And then another point was, no, it's a action visual novel. It was a bit over there everywhere. Meanwhile, for Crimson Waves, I knew I wanted it to be short and small, but I also did not want to deal with the headache of marketing a commercial visual novel right after Asterism. So I purposefully made it free, which was another reason why I made it so short and small. So while Crimson Waves is sort of underperforming in terms of downloads, I knew it would just because it's had such a short development cycle. So very short time to market it and blah, blah, blah. But I'm very happy with how it came out though.
Cool. All right. Any more questions? I guess we can keep catch up in the chat. Meanwhile, it's Chino's turn to be up. Thank you so much for your talk. Things are exploding behind me.
Let's see. Stop sharing.